to the Red Pill Sports and Entertainment Show. I am your host, Albert Apache, and as usual, we are brought to you by Open Source Self Defense, Fitness, and Grappling. Okay, guys, so major red pill alert on this. We're going to talk about a topic that is fairly controversial within the jiu jitsu realm, and we're going to get a little bit into that. So, first and foremost, guys, is the fact that um, this is my opinion. Okay. This is how I feel. I've been training for over 7 years, and this is what I think. So, I got asked a question by somebody who was training jujitsu uh, with me, and they've only been training for about you know 6 maybe 8 months now, and they had a friend of theirs um, ask them about 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, and their friend wanted to start rolling jiu-jitsu as well, but their question or their comment was, well, I think I want to do 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu because it's more quote unquote realistic. And we kind of got into a discussion, and you know this other student asked me, hey, do you think that 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu is better, or do you think it's more realistic, or do you think it's not very realistic? Well, here's the thing, guys. Let's first take a look at the 10th Planet system and what Eddie Bravo originally started to put together when he put together 10th Planet. Originally, when Eddie Bravo got into the 10th Planet system, he decided he wanted to focus on no gi jiu-jitsu because of MMA, and that he wanted to deal with a clenching type system rather than a system that used grips. Grips meaning grabbing a hold of the gi or the gi pants or whatever. Now, it has been effective. People can't say that 10th Planet doesn't work in general. Um, it does have some effectiveness, just like every other jiu-jitsu, it has effectiveness, right? I mean, kind of depends on the person using it and how skilled they are at it and all that kind of stuff. This is where I kind of pump the brakes, though. Uh, to be fair, when I first started jiu-jitsu, or how I got into jiu-jitsu, is I used to train and I guess I do still train it, but just not at a school. Um, I used to train Kaju Kimbo, which, you know, the Ju part of Kaju Kimbo stands for Judo and Jiu Jitsu. And um, it's an eclectic system. And that's how I got introduced to the grappling portion of martial arts. And I really gravitated towards it. And that's what led me to start training jujitsu specifically. I really enjoyed it. I really thought it was very effective. I thought it was very practical. Um, so I started to train it more and more. When I first started training jujitsu, I believed very much like Eddie Bravo, which was, hey, no gi jujitsu, no gi grappling. It's much more realistic for self defense than gi jujitsu. As I've gotten more and more experienced through my jujitsu, um, you know, maturity, I don't share that opinion anymore. Now, granted, Eddie Bravo's been doing jujitsu a lot longer than I have. He's been around, many more professional fighters than I have, uh, you know, but this is my opinion. I just think that when I look at jujitsu, when I think of self defense, and what Eddie's did, kind of uh, saying is self defense, are two different things. In my opinion, self defense is survive and escape the situation with as little damage as possible. That's what self defense in my book is. I think in Eddie Bravo's book, just listening to him articulate, it sounds like he defines self defense as you're in an altercation and you win the altercation. You win the fight in a submission or devastatingly, dominant position, from positional control or from some type of submission. I think that's how he defines self defense. So I think there's a difference in the school of thought there. You know, I've listened to Eddie Bravo talk a lot. I personally feel 10th Planet is not the best for self defense, um, and especially for the average Joe, right, or the average Susie, right. I just don't think that it's the best system for self defense, and the biggest reason why is because a lot of the specific 10th planet or signature 10th planet techniques are heavily reliant on physical attributes, specifically flexibility. Now, if you're going to take up jujitsu and you're going to teach kids, that's one thing, right? Kids are pretty pliable. Most kids, by the age of 10, 12 years old, they haven't gotten into a rut yet. They're very flexible, they're able to move very well. You could probably teach them how to do a lot of the 10th planet signature positions, get into them with little to, no trouble at all. Now, a 30-year-old that's never trained any jujitsu, a 30-year-old that's never trained any kind of martial art, you start trying to, get their body into, you know, the rubber guard, you're going to have a problem. And I know this because I help warm up, train, and coach the adult class. And you would be surprised how hard it can be to teach somebody how to shrimp, how to hip away effectively, how to do a basic hip escape, how to then drive the knee in underneath to regain guard. That is incredibly difficult for some people. The lack of body awareness, the lack of flexibility is stunning to me. Okay? So it's just, I feel that the 10th planet system can be a little bit too physically attribute based. Now, Eddie Bravo, to his credit, says that, the system is there to, you know, um, overcome strength and size, right? And that's great. But if you're just substituting having one type of athletic ability for a different type of athletic ability, then you're still basing the system on athletic capability. And so that's kind of where I'm not so sure that 10th Planet is the best for a self defense system for adults, and especially the average adult, right? Not talking about the athlete. Um, Next, I came across, I believe the video is by BJJ Brick, and they were talking about an app called Maroon. And I really liked what he had to say here. Now, granted, Maroon is not across every single platform. This is the first time I've ever heard of it, so their sample size may be small. That being said, if you look at the data that they're pulling, let's just assume for a second that it's representative of the jiu-jitsu community. You know, what it's saying is that about 10% of the jiu-jitsu community is doing primarily no gi, i.e., they're focused on no gi. They don't do any other training. Well, that would suggest then that 10% of, you know, uh, practitioners that win in no gi tournaments then should be from no gi schools, right? I mean, if the numbers were to follow. However, that's not what we see. That's not what we see at all. We see it's mostly people in tournaments that are winning train both in gi and no gi. And then that goes on to be very representative in the rest of the data that the gentleman provides from the Maroon app. That when you train both gi and no gi, you tend to train longer and you tend to roll more, right? That's the data that the app is providing. Now, I understand the app is not used, it's not a universally known and universally used app, but let's just say that the sample size is representative. Let's assume, because that's all we can do, right? You know, Eddie likes to say, there's no science there when he talks about, the jujitsu game and gi versus no gi, and he thinks that it's science when really it's not science. It's anecdotal evidence is what he's talking about, and if we're going to use anecdotal evidence, then the anecdotal evidence is that you are better off for self defense and overall understanding of your jiu-jitsu to train in the gi and do no gi. That's the best. That's the absolute best. And so, because of that, that would mean that strictly being a 10th planet practitioner is not in the best interest of the beginning jiu-jitsu practitioner. If you're trying to get self-defense efficient, it seems to suggest it's not the best. Further, I would say if you look at some of the best UFC fighters, again, we're going to go by anecdotal evidence. What is Eddie likes to call it science, but really it's anecdotal evidence, right? What do we see? What's our experience? Our experience is that most UFC champions that we've had train in the gi. If Tony Ferguson, and I'm a huge Tony Ferguson fan, okay, if Tony Ferguson beats Khabib, I believe this is going to be the first uh, champion that would have a strictly 10th planet pedigree as far as jiu-jitsu is concerned. Now, that seems a bit odd if we're going to say that, no gi jiu-jitsu, 10th planet jiu-jitsu is superior for MMA than gi jiu-jitsu. I mean, we have Kamaru Usman has, told his own story about, this is why I've started training in the gi because of a loss. Khabib, he does sambo or combat sambo. That's his background. They use a gi. John Jones, one of the greatest UFC champions that we've known, most prolific, he's gone to go train in the gi. He's currently a purple belt, but he started off as a basic white belt, and that's already been an outstanding grappler when he started that. Okay, he had already won a couple of Naga tournaments and things of that nature, right? He had already been winning in the UFC and all of those kind of things. He'd already been champion in the UFC, but started to train in the gi. So, all in all, I think that, while I understand what Eddie's trying to say, I understand the logic. It's just my opinion that if you're starting out in jiu-jitsu, especially if you're looking for self-defense, 10th planet is not the system you want to start off with. That's just my opinion. I really feel like the best thing is to go to a school where they train both gi and no gi. And the reality is that most jiu-jitsu schools, most jiu-jitsu academies nowadays do train both jiu-jitsu in the gi and in no gi. Okay, and if you can find a place that also, when they're doing the no gi, will focus on some basic wrestling skills, that's awesome. That's even better, right? Because if you have some basic judo, some basic jiu-jitsu in both gi and no gi, and you have some basic wrestling skills, I mean, you're pretty much prepared for about 99% of the population. And again, I'm not saying that 10th planet jiu-jitsu can't work in a self-defense system. Okay, I'm not saying that it can't work in a self-defense situation. I just think it depends on how you're going to define it. I think that gi training prepares you to survive much better than no gi training, because there's just so many other ways they can submit you in the gi. There are just so many options for submissions. I think it sharpens your survival skills to train in the gi, which essentially that's what self-defense is. It's surviving first and escaping second. And the last part of that is to escape with as little damage as possible. And so I feel that if that's the definition you're using, I think that gi jiu-jitsu is superior for self-defense. And, not to mention that, Eddie Bravo himself has kind of mentioned that, he does, uh, old video, I guess it came out about 9 years ago, it does talk a little bit about how if you can't, do the splits or you can't sit in a flat butterfly or something to that effect, um, you would never get a black belt from him, which means that his system is predicated on, you know, flexibility. It's predicated on, you know, physical attributes. And anytime you say that a self defense system, you're going to say that it's predicated on physical attributes, on athleticism. I tend to think that maybe that's not the best self defense system, because the whole point of self defense is many times you're going to be confronted by somebody who's bigger, stronger, or otherwise more athletic than you. You're really not worried about escaping from somebody that you're more athletic than, right? You pretty much know that you can escape from those people most of the time, right? It's when you're overmatched that you need to be able to survive and escape. So there's my 2 cents. Now I know, like I said, this is going to be controversial, but hey, it's a red pill show, guys. If you can't handle the red pill truth, then it is what it is. And if you're a 10th planet practitioner and you disagree with me, hey, comment down below, let me know, tell me why. What's your anecdotal evidence, right? Because really that's what it comes down to. There's not science here. Nobody's putting together the data, but we do have anecdotal evidence. And mine suggests 10th planet is not the best for self-defense. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get into the next topic. Okay, guys, in this segment, it is Super Bowl Sunday, or it's coming up. And, of course, as you may know, the Kansas City Chiefs are facing the San Francisco 49ers. And, we got to get into this because I'm a huge football fan. So, first and foremost, it does break my heart to see the Niners there once again. Being a giant Cowboy fan like I am, it kind of kills me to see that the Niners have made it back to the Super Bowl twice since the 90s, and the Cowboys have yet to even make it to an NFC Championship game. And that's just being real with you, man. It breaks my heart. But it is what it is, and you got to give the teams props for playing well and being run well. I mean, there was a portion in time there right towards the end of Harbaugh's stint as a Niners coach that I don't know what Niner ownership and management was doing, but they really screwed the pooch on what they did there. And of course, they had notoriety for some of the wrong reasons with Colin Kaepernick and the kneeling and being sat and kneeling and whatever. And so the Niners have been able to transcend that and come out of that, and to a point where I don't think Colin Kaepernick is even, he's talked about as a football player. Everybody realizes he played for the Niners, but nobody really associates the Niners to Colin Kaepernick anymore. So, props to them for, doing the marketing and whatever they had to do and bringing in the right kind of talent and bringing in the right kind of, GM and getting a good coaching staff in place. And they've done an outstanding job. Now, I first want to look at this at the Chiefs end and talk about the Kansas City Chiefs and, some of the things that they can do. Now, here's the thing, guys. When I first watched the AFC and NFC championship games, the Monday preceding or following, those games, I was convinced that the Kansas City Chiefs were going to dominate the 49ers in tremendous fashion. I was thinking maybe Cowboys, Bills, one type of Super Bowl, 52-17 or whatever it was, type of score. Patrick Mahomes is an outstanding quarterback. He just really is a very good quarterback. He's an amazing thrower of the football. He has tremendous arm strength. He has great accuracy. He has great touch.
He understands how to read defenses pre-snap, okay, and post-snap, and it is super hard to stop him. Now, on top of being able to be a very, very good elite level in the pocket quarterback, he can also do things that can create problems when he gets out of the pocket, i.e. Russell Wilson, right, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and that can create a lot of problems, okay, for the San Francisco defense. When we look at the San Francisco 49ers and some of their, losses or close and tight games, quarterbacks that they've had a problem with, all of those quarterbacks that I just listed off have all given the 49ers problems. Lamar Jackson, gave them some problems. Very close, very tight game. Kyler Murray gave them problems, made very tight games, right? Russell Wilson, very tight, very close games, giving the 49ers defense problems. And the issue is, I believe, is that because they're so good at getting after the passer, that sometimes their rushers get a bit, just the slightest bit undisciplined. And when you're rushing a passer that is primarily a pocket passer, right, primarily sits in the pocket, doesn't really scramble a lot, or has the ability to move within the pocket but still stays within the pocket, they have a good chance to use their athletic ability to get to the passer. That being said, when they have to go against a quarterback that has tremendous mobility, can scramble well, does very good ad-libbing when the play breaks down, 49ers tend, the front four and linebacking crew tend to have a problem. Okay? And that starts to break down when that quarterback's able to break containment and scramble. The slightest bit of over pursuit or too far pushed into the backfield by a rusher, okay, gives guys like Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson, Lamar Jackson, gives them the ability, the smallest window that they need to step up and create problems. Now, the reason why this becomes such a big problem is these guys are also looking downfield. And the 49er secondary, more so than probably other defenses that are top ranked, is very predicated on system and technique rather than athletes. So when you start getting into backyard type football, which, the scrambling quarterback essentially is, right? That's like old days when, you did the whole thing and dropped back and you had to count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi to rush the passer, and guys were just running around downfield and you were heaving the ball, right? When it turns into that, scheme starts to break down. And when scheme starts to break down, it starts to favor the better athlete. And generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, the better athletes are on offense, right? I mean, most coaches, and you see this all the way down to Pop Warner, so, you can sit there and get mad all you want, but this is the reality. All the way down to Pop Warner, what generally happens is that the best athletes get moved onto offense. They get moved to the skill positions. They're your tailbacks. They're your quarterbacks. They're your wide receivers. And, it's the other, it's the second tier guys that end up being, the blockers, the lead blocker, the fullback, the tight end. And then as you go up into high school and college and you only play one way and you don't play two ways, they become, the lower tier wide receivers, convert to defensive backs and, things of that nature. So this is why I believe that the Niners have a problem with the scrambling quarterback. And this is why I felt like immediately after the championship games, Kansas City Chiefs were going to dominate San Francisco 49ers in this upcoming Super Bowl. But as I started to take a step back and really think about this matchup, there's another thing that the Kansas City Chiefs also do, and another thing that Patrick Mahomes has that can be exploited by the San Francisco 49er defense. And that's the fact that Mahomes, and rightly so, okay, believes in his arm. He believes that he can make the throw. He believes he can beat the defense. He believes he can beat the coverage. Not only does he believe he can beat the coverage, but his head coach, Andy Reid, believes that he can beat the coverage. So this tendency is what has led to the Kansas City Chiefs getting behind early in games. You also start to think about, who is the pressure on? Is the pressure on the 49ers to win, or is the pressure on the Kansas City Chiefs? Now, I don't know what has been talked about in the typical, mainstream sports media, but as a fan from the outside looking in, I know that the Kansas City Chiefs should be, and rightly so, should be the favorites to win this game. They should have the better offense from what we've seen throughout the season. They should be able to put up points from what we've seen throughout the season. They are a high-powered, explosive offense. So given all of that, in my mind, I think that all of the pressure is on the Kansas City Chiefs. Look, they have the quarterback that, quote-unquote, has proven that he's the next guy, right? He's the next Manning, he's the next Favre, he's the next Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, right? That everybody already believes that about him. The doubt is coming at Jimmy Garoppolo. That's where the doubt is focused on, right? Well, can he really win in the big games? We don't know. He only threw 6 passes. Blah-zity, blah-zity, blah, blah, blah. Now, don't misunderstand me. It kills me to say this because I am a Cowboy fan. I will be rooting for the Chiefs. I do not want the Niners to have one more Super Bowl than the Cowboys do. I'm just going to be honest about it. But that being said, I think that, Jimmy G is probably the highest performing, best quarterback, most achieved quarterback I have seen going into the Super Bowl since Trent Dilfer, okay, that has the lack of respect that he has. Like, besides Trent Dilfer, and I'd even argue that he's probably even more disrespected than Trent Dilfer. People do not respect Jimmy G as a quarterback, as a passer, as an offensive threat. And I think that's a huge mistake. Even in the games that Jimmy G has struggled, if you really go back and watch those tapes, okay, it's not generally due to bad throws or bad reads. It's generally due to receivers dropping passes. Balls hitting receivers in the hands and popping up into the air, right? That's what it's due to. It's not due to Jimmy G not seeing the open guy. It's not due to Jimmy G not being able to read the defense pre-snap. It's not bad ball placement, okay? That 90% of the time, when you see Jimmy G have a game where he struggled, it is not because of his performance. So I feel like all the pressure is going to be on Mahomes. Further, when we look at the coaching staff, I think all the pressure is on Andy Reid. Andy Reid has to win this Super Bowl. All we've ever heard about Andy Reid is that he can't win the big game, right? He cannot win the big game. He can only play from the front. So if they don't have success early, I'm sure there's going to be the confidence that they can come back. But if they give up a lead the way that they have in the last two playoff games against the Texans and the Titans, if they give up 10, 13, 17 points to the 49ers, they might have a high-scoring, highly potent offense. But are they going to have enough clock left? Because the one thing that people are underrating about Jimmy G, and which makes him a very good quarterback, and I think really could be the next Joe Montana, Steve Young-esque quarterback for the Niners, is that he's smart. He doesn't, and he's humble. He doesn't care who gets the credit. He doesn't care that he only threw 6 passes. He doesn't care that people will say, oh, well, it was the running game. He does not care. The one thing Belichick instilled in that guy was, it's about, did the team win? And maybe it wasn't even Belichick that instilled it in him. Maybe Belichick saw that, and that's why he even drafted the kid, right? But it's the one thing that I think is so underrated about Jimmy G. So, as I'm taking a look at this matchup, we look at Shanahan now. Shanahan has learned his lesson from that Patriots versus Atlanta game. He will not abandon the run. People always talk about explosive plays, and they talk about explosive plays in the pass game, as if explosive plays do not happen in the run game. And this is what they don't understand. In that zone blocking scheme, with 3 different running backs with unique running styles, you can rotate and have a fresh guy in there and go to the hot hand. Okay? When you have that, you can have explosive plays in the run game. You can pop off runs for 20, 25 yards, 15 yards, chunks at a time. And what that does, beyond being big plays and helping to put points on the board, it also wears down a defense. See, Kansas City has been able to get stops. People are talking about the Kansas City offense and, oh my goodness, they were this and they were that and explosive, and Mahomes was able to come back. But part of the reason why they were able to come back was because those other teams also gave up the lead, right? Those other teams gave up the lead. They essentially threw in the towel, so to speak, right? And I think I said they played the Titans. It wasn't the Titans or the Texans. It wasn't the Texans. I can't remember who they played first round, but those other teams kind of threw in the towel on the run game, started throwing the ball. Kansas City also got stops. I don't know that Kansas City is going to get stops at the same efficiency against the Niners that they did against the Titans. I just don't see it. So I'm really curious to see what happens if they get behind. And I think they just might get behind. When you match up these teams and you look at their offenses and you look at their defenses, if we're going to go with the idea that defense wins championships, the offenses get you to the dance, but defense finishes the night, then I have to say that the Niners should win this game. And this is what I'm going to say. I really, deep down, believe this is going to be a lopsided game, one way or the other. If the Niners win, it's going to be a dismantling, an absolute dismantling of the Chiefs. They're going to destroy that defense. They're going to run all over them. They're going to go to play action. They're going to put up 34 points, maybe 40 points, over 40 points, and absolutely destroy the Chiefs. Look to see huge runs by Coleman, Mosier. Their running game is going to be amazing. And they're just going to pound the Chiefs into submission. Or, if the Chiefs win, which I do not think they will, but if they do, it'll be because Shanahan did not abandon the run game. They got a lead. And the Kansas City Chiefs were able to stop the run, 3 and outs, and were able to just go downfield. But I don't think this is going to be a close game. And I don't think it's going to be a shootout. I don't think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I don't think this is going to be a shootout. A low-scoring defensive game where it's like 17-10 or, 21-17. I don't think it's going to be that close. I don't think it's going to be a 3-point spread. I don't even think it's going to be a touchdown spread. I think the spread is going to be at least 10 points. And I think it's going to be a lopsided victory one way or the other. Me personally, because I believe in defense and I really think that defense is where it's at, I think that the Niners have the better defense. I think that the Niners also have the better special teams. And as far as offense, I know this is going to come as a shot in the throat to most people. But I really believe that the Niners have just as good of an offense as the Chiefs. It's just a different kind of offense. It's just a different scheme. But it's just as good, just as powerful, just as potent. And so when you put all of these things together, I really believe that the Niners are going to win this game. I would probably say the over-under, if you were going over-under, if it's 50 points, I would say over, right? If it's 60 points, I would say under. But I do definitely think that the Niners will win by more than 10 points. I think this will be about at least a 14, if not a 20-point victory for the San Francisco 49ers. So there's my call, calling my shot, guys. Hopefully, you know, I'm right, or hopefully I'm wrong. I'm going to put money on the Chiefs because I just cannot root for the 49ers. Oh gosh, that's horrible, right? I think I know what's going on. I'm logically talking it out, thinking about it, really considering all the angles. Been watching a lot of film on these two teams just to be ready to watch this game. I really enjoy football. It's my favorite team sport. But I'm going to be rooting for the team that I think is going to lose and putting money on them. God, that's horrible, right? But anyhow, it's fun, guys. So that's it for this segment. In the next segment, let's get a little bit into the John Jones Reyes fight and what's going to happen there. And, we've been talking about it a little bit. We're going to talk about it a little more. It's not this weekend, but I believe it's the weekend following on the 8th, I believe. And so let's talk about that. All right.
What is up, guys? So coming up next weekend, we have John Jones versus Dominic Reyes. It's going to be, I think, a very interesting fight. I really like this matchup. I like some of the things that it brings to the table. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what maybe Reyes can look to give John Jones problems, because let's just face it, it'd be boring if we just talked about John Jones. We all know who John Jones is. Pretty much he's unbeaten. I mean, he does have the one loss by DQ, but I mean, he wasn't beat up in that fight by any means. So I don't really count that as a loss. I mean, pretty much the guy is unbeaten. He's pretty much undisputed in the lightweight. He's undisputed the best lightweight. Of course, there is light heavyweight with the asterisks of the PEDs. And, it would be a boring conversation to talk about how amazing John Jones is, because that's been rehashed so many times. So what I want to focus on is more about the times that John Jones has had problems and has looked human, and do we think Reyes can exploit those same types of game plans? So the times that we've seen John Jones have problems is when he's gotten into more traditional boxing ranges, right? Not in the kickboxing range and not necessarily in the clinch, but in a more traditional boxing range. While he has a very long reach, he seems to struggle when he has to box. We saw this in the first Gustafsson fight, right? Gustafsson was able to give John Jones a lot of problems by getting into that boxing range. When you get into the boxing range with John Jones, if you notice, the times that John Jones looks human is when you get into boxing range and you throw combinations, okay? John Jones tends to be a one, at most two shot type of sniper, right? He takes a shot, breaks your rhythm, kind of backs out, makes space, manages the distance, steps in, throws a shot, breaks up your timing, manages the distance. John Jones does not go into flurries very heavily unless he feels like he has you hurt. But he's very energy efficient, right? We also saw in that first Gustafsson fight that it looked like he was more human than we were used to seeing, because he started to get tired in the fourth and fifth rounds. And I think this is because he had to fight a non-conventional style of fight for himself. Like I said, I think he likes to throw a shot, at the most two, back out, manage the distance, throw another shot, just to disrupt your timing. It's one shot at a time, and it's varied, right? Sometimes it's a leg kick, sometimes it's, a punch, sometimes it's a step in elbow, whatever the case may be. It's one shot, reestablish the distance, manage it. One shot, reestablish the distance. One shot, maybe two shots, reestablish the distance, unless he rocks you. In that first Gus fight, what we saw was a John Jones that had to answer back the combinations. He had to answer back the combinations. And what this did was it took him out of his footwork, and this is why Gus was able to get a takedown when nobody up to that point had taken down John Jones. It was why he looked a little bit more gassed and a little more human in the fourth and fifth rounds than what we're used to. You also noticed in the second fight with DC that DC looked very good in that first round, and even in the second round. He looked really, really good. And what DC was doing was getting into the boxing range and then throwing combinations. It wasn't just one punch and done. It wasn't like he was looking to try to finish John with a single shot. He was throwing 2-3 shots at a time, 2-3 shots at a time. He would allow John to back up if to an extent to stay within the boxing range, but not all the way out. And when John would try to come into the clinch, DC used his Greco-Roman skills in the clinch to either stay standing or go for his own takedown. And these are the times that we've seen John Jones look human, right? I mean, DC would step in, throw an elbow, throw a hand. He did very well playing that hand game that John Jones likes to play. John Jones likes to paw out with his lead hand and trap a hand. Now, John Jones does this a little bit similar to what Conor does, right? Conor paws out with that lead hand, and usually what Conor does is he covers your lead hand. Like 99% of the time, he's covering your lead hand, and he's trying to make you throw, especially if you're an orthodox fighter, he's trying to make you throw your right hand so that he can slip it and land his own left, right? John Jones does a similar thing, but he actually picks which hand based on what his strategy is. And so he'll sometimes paw the front hand, your lead hand, or sometimes he'll paw towards the backhand. And then he kind of uses that elbow as he raises it across his body. If, let's say, you're standing southpaw and he's standing orthodox, he'll reach across to paw at your left hand, and because his arms are so long, he's still able to use his elbow to kind of come up and block any kind of hook or any type of over the top lead hand you might throw, right? He's able to do that, and then he also follows through and comes over with that elbow. So that's what John Jones does effectively. What we saw DC do really good is counter that really, really nice. He answered that hand pawing game very well in the first and second rounds. Of course, we all know what happened later on in the fight. You know, John Jones set him up, conditioned him to think that the low kick was coming, and then came upstairs to the head and knocked him out. You know, it happens. But if you rewatch that fight, you'll see that DC was actually having a lot of success with the game plan that he came in with. Next, when we've seen him against a knockout striker, a striker that does have the one-punch KO, we saw him look very human against Santos as well. Yes, I know he dominated that fight for the most part. I thought it was a really close fight on the cards. And what we saw was that Santos, because he respected the power of Santos, there were times that he would do the pawing, he would do the posting that he likes to do by sticking that hand out, and Santos would just kind of barrel through it. And what he was doing was he was causing John Jones to take bad angles and either run away from him or turn away from him in a very undisciplined type of fashion, right? In a way that could have got him knocked out if a kick would have come at the right time. So we see that John tends to have problems not only in the boxing range, he doesn't just tend to have problems if you have an answer for that pawing game, but he will also have problems if you can establish pressure. John likes to be the fighter that is establishing pressure. One of the ways that John Jones makes sure that he is establishing pressure and that you can't get your pressure going is by doing this posting, where he brings up one hand to cover and he posts out that other hand. Now, Reyes has already talked about this. He's very aware of it. What he doesn't like about this is that John Jones tends to splay his fingers when he does this. And this is why John Jones has so many eye pokes to his credit. by the letter of the law or by the letter of the rule book, John Jones should not be able to do this. Reyes has talked already to a few different outlets about how he's going to have a conversation about John Jones' use of this technique with the referee. I think you're going to see Reyes maybe see that technique once or twice. If he sees it once or twice early, I think he's going to over dramatize. He's going to bring it to the ref's attention. Okay? I think he's going to complain. He's going to be vocal. I think this could help to take this technique away from John Jones. It's a very effective technique. Khabib uses his same style when he's getting blitzed as well. He posts out that hand and he covers up on the other side, right? So that's how he tends to stop that blitzing pressure attack. Now, John Jones, like I said, he has this problem when you come forward. Now, I'm not saying that he has giant holes in his game. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to look at where Reyes can exploit some weaknesses, some flaws that we've seen. We've also seen that he tends to be somewhat susceptible to the leg kick, particularly low and to the calf. So I think we might see some of that from Reyes. Reyes' boxing is really good. It's really crisp. Now, if you listen to Anthony Smith after the fight, he did talk about how the length wasn't really the problem. It was the distance management. And now some people go, that's a contradiction. But if you really listen to what Anthony Smith was saying really closely was that John Jones doesn't really use his striking length, his striking reach to establish distance. He tends to use his legs to establish and maintain distance, right? And so that already diminishes the issue of the reach. This is another reason why John Jones tends to have problems with a pressuring fighter. Because if you're stepping in close enough that you take away the kicking game, where it's very hard to get your leg up quickly to establish that distance and you have to box, then it turns into a boxing match. And again, we just talked about how he tends to have a little bit of an issue there. And I think that issue comes from the style which he fights, which is kind of a sniper style, right? One shot, maybe two shots at a time. Once you get him into boxing range and you're able to throw combinations and you force John to have to throw combinations, it's somewhere that he's not used to fighting in the octagon under the lights. Maybe he does it in sparring, but we don't see it very often under the lights when he's in the octagon. Reyes will further diminish that reach, okay, if he can get into boxing range and he continues to use the angles that he uses. He uses really great angles. He really steps off and he shortens the distance between his punch and his target. Usually your jaw, your head, sometimes your body. Another aspect of Reyes' game that's a little bit underlooked is his kicking game. Everybody kind of already has given him a lot of credit, very similar to Conor, for his left hand, but too many people are starting to classify him as all he has is his left hand. But the reality is that Reyes also has some really nice kicks. He throws them very, very well. He's has a couple of KOs and a couple of knockdowns due to kicks to the head, okay? He also goes to the body with them really, really well. He has pretty good wrestling skills, okay? He's able to keep his feet. And you saw that even against Weidman, who is a much better wrestler, a much higher level wrestler than Reyes is. Yet he was able to do enough to get back to his feet. You saw some frustration on his face, but I don't think it was frustration of, oh my goodness, this guy took me down, as much as it was like, I made a mistake and I shouldn't have been taken down. And so I think that Reyes will do a really good job of not getting taken down. I think that if Reyes can keep this fight on its feet, he has a really good chance as long as he can go forward and exploit that boxing. He has to go to the boxing game. He can use the kicks. Like I said, he has a good kicking game. But he needs to use the kicks in a way that allow him to enter into the boxing range. the way that Santos used his leg kicks early to kind of attack uh, John Jones' legs, right? So that he could enter into the boxing range and start throwing heavy. That's kind of what Reyes needs to do as well. If he can get into that boxing range, then he can create problems. I think he'll be very well served in having that conversation with the ref, bringing attention to it, and quite honestly, to be a bit of a drama queen, should that technique present itself, should he take the slightest eye poke to over dramatize it, I think it would serve him well. Now, he doesn't want to push it too far, right? Because he doesn't want to get a stoppage. But if he makes the ref aware of it, if he can get the ref to give John Jones at least a warning, if he can get a point taken, that will take that technique away. And once that technique is taken away, then you're able to come into that space and make him box and make him exchange in combinations. We really have not seen John exchange in combinations effectively. Well, I should say, to where he was not getting hit. He does his best work when he's able to land a strike and exit. Land a strike and exit. As long as he keeps your rhythm broken, right? That's where we've seen John excel. So I think Reyes has a shot. And as a matter of fact, guys, I'm going to be in Vegas this weekend, and I think Reyes has enough of a shot that if the odds look good enough and I could win enough money, I might be putting some money on Reyes. Okay, guys, that's all I got for this episode, man. I know it's a little bit rushed. I know there was some background stuff. I'm sorry about that. A lot of things on my plate, but got to get out the stuff, man. Okay, guys, if you have any comments, whatever, make sure you put them down below. Love having the conversations. We'll catch you all next time. Remember, be practical, be purposeful, get fit with a purpose.